Hi, sixth graders. This video is intended to help you in writing your narrative story, which is coming up in the next assignment. So, the introduction to this assignment is famed author Stephen King once wrote, "The scariest moment is always just before you start." The truth is, most writers have more than a moment of hesitation before diving into a new story. But if you've done the work of planning your narrative, you have nothing to fear. You already have the story, it's just waiting for you to tell it. So in other words, you've done a lot of the planning in the last lessons, and so you need to put that all together now in doing your story, in writing your actual story. So, some vocabulary that you need to know for this lesson. Plot sequence means the sequence of events in a story. Remember the setting, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. I should be able to easily identify those in your stories. You must have all of those elements. Now you don't tell, here is the rising action, here is the resolution. You just write it as your regular story, but make sure you have those things included. Sensory details. A good story is going to use descriptive words that engage the five senses. Okay, and the image at the left reminds you of the five senses of touch, taste, sight, smell, and hearing. So engage the five senses when you are writing, and it will make your story much better and much more interesting. And you are going to use a third-person narrator. The narrator is separate from your story, and it relates to the story with pronouns like he, she, and they. A third-person narrator is one who does not take part in the story. So even if you think your story would be better written in the first person, this assignment is specifically asking you to write your story in the third person using a narrator to tell your story. Okay? Now actually writing your story. So by now you have completed the outline of your story and planned the action from the beginning to the end. Now all you have to do is fill in the details, descriptions, and dialogue that will bring your characters to life and drive home your message to the reader. Now remember, when you are writing dialogue, you do need to use quotation marks around what the person is actually saying. And as with any narrative, organization is essential. As you write to your story, refer to the plot diagram you completed to keep yourself on track. So, describe the setting and character. You're going to begin by giving the reader, which is me, a clear picture of where and when the story takes place. For this narrative, you will use a third-person narrator, like we just talked about. Take advantage of the fact that your narrator can see things that the people in the story cannot. So in other words, be very descriptive. Use the narrator to tell some details that the characters might not know. That will give a good background to your reader. Then your description of the main character should allow the reader to imagine the character as a real person. Make sure you are painting a picture in my head of that person. Use descriptive details that engage the reader's five senses. Communicate the sights and sounds of your setting. Don't leave out things that make your character human, like a quirky habit. Finally, establish the character's main problem or conflict from the beginning. All right, make the make the main character a real person. And you're going to build up to a climax. So, as you begin to write the events in the rising action of your story, remember that the purpose is to increase the tension readers feel as they get closer to the climax. That makes your story really interesting and exciting. So remember, you're going to start out with the exposition, like in that diagram, and you're going to describe your your setting and the background information on your characters and all that. Then the rising action, things are beginning to happen and you're building up to that climax. Okay? Try to include moments that would make the outcome appear uncertain. The more the reader wonders whether or not the main character will succeed, the more exciting your story will be. Your climax will be the moment where the action explodes. Don't forget to include transition words that will help your reader follow the action and use vivid sensory details to bring this scene to life. In other words, transition words are then, furthermore, in addition, however, things like that. Next. So don't just state what the person is doing or what the character is doing. My dad went to work. He works at a store. My dad stocked the shelves all day. Then he came home. That is a really, really boring story. Okay? If you're going to tell a story about your dad going to work, you need to think of a problem that he might have. You need to first establish what the background is, where he works, maybe some people he works with, his boss. You need to describe him. You're going to need to think of some conflict he might have at work and build up all of the action to the climax of what might happen. Where's the turning point? Okay? Make it exciting. Use sensory details. Remember, all 5 senses, or try to, to describe what happens. Okay? And after the climax, of course, you're going to have the falling action. What happens after the climax that's building towards a denouement or resolution, which we're going to talk about right now. Use a resolution technique. Finally, as you write a resolution or ending, use one of the techniques you reviewed in the previous lessons. Be sure the main problem is solved and the loose ends are taken care of. Remember that it's all right to leave some things for the reader to infer. Okay? It doesn't mean that the reader should be guessing what happened to your dad at work. It means that you can imply some things. You don't have to state right out everything, but you do have to make sure the main problem is solved and that you are at least implying that other things were solved. Okay, so some resolution techniques that you learned about. Remember, epiphany, a moment of great understanding or clarity for a character. The aha moment for a character or his problem is the epiphany. Okay? Realization is a resolution in which the main character gains some insight that causes her to make a change in her life. And it's less powerful than an epiphany, but a realization is a way to end a story, just not as powerful. It's a little bit a weaker ending. A twist ending is really exciting because it's a resolution where readers are led to believe that the story will end in a particular way, and then it ends differently. Okay, but make sure if you're going to use a twist ending that it does make sense with your story. Okay, it can't just be something all of a sudden that happens that totally out of the blue. Resolving action is another resolution technique, which is a final event brings an end to the conflict. A resolving action uses an event to solve the conflict of the story. So that's an event that happens to solve your conflict. And an open ending. This is where the author leaves some questions for the reader. The immediate conflict is solved, but the reader is left wondering what might happen next. And this is most often used in books where there's going to be a sequel. For example, the whole Harry Potter series or any series. There still might be some loose ends that you don't know about and you're wondering about and you're waiting for the next one to come out. Okay, so be careful if you use an open ending. You can't just stop a story. You have to be really careful in how you do that. You still need to resolve a lot of the main conflicts, but you can use it carefully to leave the reader wondering. But that doesn't mean that you just stop and end it. You make sure that you choose an ending that makes sense with the story you are telling. After you're done writing, you always proofread it and revise. So it says, when you're finished with your story, be sure to proofread your work. Read your story to someone aloud to make sure you haven't left out any important details or events. If someone else reads it or you read it out loud to someone, they're going to say, well, what happened here? You know, you really need to describe this in more detail for the person to get it, because in your mind it might make sense, but on paper it might not. And of course you clean up any spelling and grammar mistakes and compare your work to the rubric before writing your final draft. Look at that little saying on the left. It says, proofread carefully to see if you any words out. You might think you didn't leave any words out, but you need to read it aloud to someone to make sure that you didn't. And the rubric can be found in a link at the end of the next lesson. The next lesson is basically what we've talked about here, but at the end of it, there's a link to the rubric, how you'll be graded, and then you have to write your story. So I'm just going to give you part of the rubric. I'm going to only give you the part of the rubric that says what excellent projects will contain. So, an excellent project or story will contain vivid language and sensory details used to describe the setting and characters. Okay? That means write down what you can see in your mind in an interesting way. So, an excellent project will also have the main problem well defined and the events follow a logical order with the tension building as the climax approaches. I'm going to especially be looking for building tension. And your dialogue brings the characters to life, and it is clear which characters are speaking. Now remember, dialogue has to have quotation marks around it. Whatever a person is saying has to have quotation marks, and make sure it's clear. I don't have to guess who's speaking. So I'm going to look to see if you used a resolution technique that logically solves the conflict and ties up the loose ends in the story. And I'm going to be checking to see that your grammar, mechanics, and punctuation add clarity to your writing and the story is an appropriate length, which we'll get into in just a second. So your actual assignment is using the character and plot you created in lessons 77 to 79. I'm not sure what that is, but in your past 3 lessons, that's what that means. You are to write a fictional narrative in the third person in 2 to 3 pages. Tell a story with a clear setting, character, conflict, climax, and resolution, like we just talked about. So, in other words, you need to use your OpenOffice or Microsoft Word to go ahead and write 2 to 3 pages of a story. Okay, we're not talking about how many words here. It's talking about 2 to 3 pages containing all of the elements that we just talked about. Okay. Then when you're done, you save it and you upload it to your assignment, and that's how you submit. Now, if you just write it in the writer box, you're not going to know if it's 2 to 3 pages. But I'll know. I know what 2 to 3 pages should look like, and it shouldn't just be a couple of paragraphs. Remember to organize your story into paragraphs and indent. Remember, that means to go in at least 5 spaces when you start a new paragraph. Okay, if you have any questions, please contact me before or while you're writing. And since you are watching this video, you must call and talk with me for credit. There's both of my phone numbers. Try both of them if I don't answer at one, and please leave a message at both of them so I am certain to get it. And good luck on your story. I'll be anxious to read them. Bye.